Hello there and welcome to the GCSE revision video on rearranging formulae. Here we're going to go through 60 rearranging formulae questions making X the subject of every single formula. We'll go through easy, medium to difficult questions, hopefully building up the skills as we go through. So let's have a go at the first one then, and each question pause the video and have a go at the answer. I'm just going to crack straight on. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to take away C. Now generally when you've got a nice easy one like this, you're looking to use the reverse order of BODMAS. So we can see here attached to the X is a multiply and an add, but I'm going to use BODMAS in reverse when rearranging my formulae. I've got add C, so that's the first thing I'm going to undo. So what's the opposite of adding C? The opposite is subtracting C. So take away C from both sides. On the left hand side it's Y, take away C, so that'd be Y minus C. And on the right hand side it would be mx plus C, take away C. And what will happen is this add C and this minus C will cancel each other out and you'll be left with mx. The next thing we'll do is we'll move up through, and on the X is a multiply, so now we'll undo the multiply. The opposite of multiplying by M is to divide by M. So that's what we'll do to both sides, divide by M. So that's take Y minus C and then divide it all by M. And the way we're going to write that as a formula is by doing a divide by symbol, but instead of doing a divide by symbol where it's like that, I'm going to do a fraction symbol where it's divide by M, because fractions are basically dividing by the denominator. So it's Y minus C over M equals X. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. What I mean by make X the subject is make it so that it's X equals and then something else with all the other letters and numbers on the other side. Let's move on to the next question. Pause the video and give this one a go. I'm going to jump straight into it. So I'm going to first do the take away U, because I've got a multiply by A and an add U. So I need to undo the U first. So it would be V minus U equals AX. And then I've got a times by A, so I'm going to do the opposite of multiplying by A, which is to divide by A. So it would be V minus U over A equals X. And there we are, that's the answer to that question. Let's move on to the next one. Y equals A minus BX. Okay, so here's where we're going to learn to do something different here. When the X is on one side and it is in a negative position, like this one here is it's minus BX, it's so much easier to make it a positive by moving it onto the other side. Now how are we going to move it onto the other side? What I'm going to do here to both sides is add BX onto both sides. So I'll add BX. So on the left hand side that will give me Y, add BX. And on the right hand side it will give me A, take away BX, add BX, and those two things there will cancel each other out. So I'm left with A. And now it's going to be a lot easier now that X is positive on the left hand side. The next thing I'll do is I'll take away this Y letter, so take away Y from both sides, and I'll be left with BX equals A minus Y. And the final thing to do will be to divide by this B, because X is being multiplied by B, and I'm going to do the opposite, so divide by B, divide by B, and I'm going to get X equals A minus Y divided by B. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. So when you have a minus X or an X is in a negative state, add it to the other side and then makes the question a lot easier. So have a go at this one here then, pause the video and give this one a go. I'm going to now have a go at this one. So the first thing I'm going to do, X is in a negative situation here, so let's make it positive and add CX onto the other side. So I'm going to add whatever's attached to the X as well. I'm not just going to add X to the other side, I'll add whatever's attached to X as well. So it's going to be Y plus CX on the left hand side equals AB minus CX, add CX. Well, these two things here will obviously cancel each other out. One's a negative, one's positive, so I'll have AB. I'm trying to make X the subject. I've got something multiplying to the X or adding to the X. I'm going to do the reverse of BODMAS, and addition would appear first, so I need to subtract the Y, because I'm always doing the opposite of what I've how it's being connected to x here. So it's cx equals ab minus y, and then divide by the c, so it's going to be ab minus y divided by c. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. Pause the video and give this one a go. First of all, I think what I'll do is I'll expand the brackets. PR minus dpx equals t. So what I've done there, on the last term, I've made sure that the order of the letters multiplying together is in alphabetical order. Because if I were to write p dx, that would be absolutely fine. If I was to write dxp, that would also be absolutely fine. It doesn't matter what order you rearrange your letters into, because when you're multiplying three things together, it doesn't matter the order you multiply them in, just it's generally mathematically preferred if you write it in alphabetical order with any numbers at the start. Now the next thing I'll do is I'll sort out the x term because it's in a negative situation here, so I'll add dpx onto the other side. Add dpx. So on the left hand side it's going to be PR minus dpx, add dpx, so these two things here will obviously cancel each other out, so I'm left with PR, and on the right hand side it's going to be t plus dpx. The next thing I'll do is I'll take away the t onto the other side. Whoops, that's wrong. PR minus t equals dpx. And then the next thing I'll do is I'll divide by what's being multiplied onto x, and that's a d and a p. So I'll divide by both the letters d and p. So it's going to be PR minus t over dp equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. Pause the video and give this one a go. I'm going to expand the brackets first, so it's going to make it AR squared minus, now I'm going to expand the brackets here to here, but I'm going to make sure it's in alphabetical order first, and it's only r that's going to be squared, so it's going to be BR squared x equals f. So r here is being squared, none of the other two letters are being squared. Now the first thing I'll do here is I'll sort out the x term because it's in a bit of a negative situation here. So I'll add BR squared x to both sides. Add BR squared x. So I'm going to get AR squared equals f plus BR squared x. Then I'll take away the f here, so it'll be AR squared minus f equals BR squared x. And the last thing I'll do is I'll divide by whatever's being multiplied onto the x, and that is b and r squared. BR squared. So on the left hand side it's going to be AR squared minus f over BR squared equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. Pause the video and give this one a go. In this case it's going to be g equals a, and I'm going to expand the brackets, plus 2a plus 2x. Now this one's not too bad. I need to make x the subject, so I'll take away these two bits onto the other side. So take away r and take away 2a, all in the same breath. Take away r and take away 2a. So that will give me g minus r minus 2a equals 2x. And then divide by 2 to get rid of this, times by 2. So g minus r minus 2a divided by 2 equals x. And there we are, that's the answer in this question. Let's move on to the next one. So in this case it's going to be this thing here. Now I'm going to carefully expand the brackets here, because when I expand the brackets I'm going to get f equals 6. Minus 3 times a is minus 3a, and minus 3 times bx is minus 3bx. So it's taking away everything in this bracket, or taking away 3 lots of everything in this bracket. So both things need to be subtracted. In the next part I'm going to sort out the x situation here because it's in a bit of a negative state. So I'm going to add 3bx onto the other side. Then take away the f. and then divide by the two things that are being multiplied by x, and that's 3b. So divide by 3 and b, all in the same manoeuvre. So my answer here is going to be x equals 6 minus 3a minus f over 3b. And there we are, that's the answer in this question. Let's move on to the next question. Pause the video and give this one a go. I'm going to crack straight on. So g equals r squared, and now I'm going to take away both of the things in this bracket. So it's going to be take away b and take away sx. X is in a negative situation here, so I'll add it to the other side. Then I'll take away the g onto the other side as well, so r squared minus b minus g. And then I'll divide by s because that's being multiplied to the x. And there we are, that's the answer in this question. So just be really careful when you're expanding a bracket and it's got a negative at the start of that bracket. Let's move on to the next question, making x the subject here. First of all, x is in a bit of a negative situation, so I'll add the whole of that thing on the other side. wxy equals f. Then I'll take away the y, because it's being added onto the term with x in here. And now I'm going to divide by everything that's being multiplied to x. W is being multiplied to x and y is being multiplied to x. So I'm going to divide by w and the y letter as well. So divide by wy. So that will leave me just with x that's in the middle of these two things, and then it's f minus y over wy. And there we are, that's the answer in this question. Let's move on to the next one. Pause the video and give this one a go. So we're introducing squares and square roots now. So what's the opposite of squaring? Well, it's the square root. So on both sides of the equation here, I'm going to square root both sides. And that's going to give me x equals the square root of y. And sometimes you'll need to write plus or minus y because it's, if we think about it, x squared equals 9. If I get rid of the squared symbol here, then x equals 3. But it could also be the number minus 3 as well, because if you do minus 3 squared, you get 9 as well. That's a negative number times a negative number there, so you get 9 as well. So don't forget to put the little plus or minus symbol in front of any square roots when you're reversing a square. Now when you've got something like this and it's 2x squared equals y, we still need to follow the reverse operations of BODMAS. Let's have a look. We have multiply in there because we've got a 2 times, and we've got a power. O is power or order, I'd think of it as power. So I've got this thing here as well. So the first thing I do, starting from the bottom and working my way up, is to get rid of the multiply. So I need to divide by 2 first. So divide by 2 first, divide by 2 first, and I'm going to get x squared equals y divided by 2. And then the next thing to do, we'll get rid of the square symbol, so I'll square root both sides. So my answer here is going to be x equals plus or minus the square root of y divided by 2. And there we are, that's the answer for this question. Let's move on to the next one. So still following the reverse order of BODMAS, and addition is the lowest thing on there. So I'm going to take away first. So I'm going to get 3x squared equals b, so y minus b. Then I'm going to undo the multiply next by dividing by 3. So x squared equals y minus b divided by 3. And then I'm going to get rid of the square root symbol by square rooting. So x equals plus or minus the square root of y minus b over 3. And there we are, that's the answer in this question. Let's move on to the next one. So x here is in a negative situation, so I'll need to add it to the other side. So I'm going to get a equals y plus 2x squared. So I've added 2x squared to both sides here. The next thing I need to do is get rid of this addition thing, so I'll subtract y from both sides. So it'd be a minus y equals 2x squared. Then I need to undo the multiply next, because we're doing the reverse order of BODMAS. So divide by 2, divide by 2. So a minus y over 2 equals x squared. And then I'll get rid of the square symbol by square rooting both sides. So that's going to be the square root of a minus y over 2 equals x, and the plus minus of that answer. Let's move on to the next question, making x the subject here. So if we follow the operations of BODMAS, then I've got a subtraction here, but actually that subtraction is inside some brackets. So actually this subtract a is the thing I need to undo last, because it's actually in some brackets. I'm going to need to undo this subtract u first. So the first thing I'm going to do here is add u to both sides. Add u. So what will I be left with? Well, on the left hand side it will be 4 brackets x minus a squared minus u plus u. So these two things here will cancel out. So I'll be left with 4x minus a squared equals y plus u. Then I'll have to divide by 4 because I need to undo the multiply next. So I'm going up the order of BODMAS here. So divide by 4. So that will give me x minus a squared equals y plus u divided by 4. The next thing I'm going to do is now think about the power here that's surrounding my brackets. So I need to undo the squared symbol here. So that's going to be square root both sides. So I'm going to get x minus a in brackets equals the square root of u, y plus u divided by 4, plus or minus that. Now, when I've just got some x minus a inside the brackets and then nothing surrounding the brackets, here's where I can now delete the brackets. If there's nothing on the outside of a pair of brackets, you might as well just delete the brackets. Now here's where I need to start from the beginning again once I've deleted those brackets and undo the subtraction by adding. So I'm now going to add a to both sides. So my answer is x equals plus or minus the square root of y plus u divided by 4 plus a. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. So when you've got brackets, that's at the top of the order of BODMAS. You want to sort out the bracket stuff last. Sort out all the stuff that's surrounding it, like in this case here we had to add u first to get rid of this minus u. Then we divided by 4 to get rid of the multiply by 4. Then we square rooted to get rid of this squared symbol. Then we went into the brackets and we started from the beginning again. Starting from subtraction, working our way upwards. Okay, so let's have a go at this question now. So the reverse of square rooting is squaring. So what I'm going to do here is square both sides. So the square and the square root will cancel each other out. So 7 minus 2x equals y squared. X is in a bit of a negative situation here, so I'll add it to the other side. Then I'll take away the y squared from the right hand side to the left hand side, and then I'll divide by 2. And I get my final answer here. So there we are, that's the answer in this question. Let's move on to the next one. Pause the video and give this one a go. Otherwise, I'm going to look at the operations of BODMAS. And here I've got a multiply, a subtract, and a power. But effectively, what's happening inside this square root is there is a bracket around this 4 minus ax. It's just an invisible bracket and mathematicians generally don't write it. But when you see something has a big square root around it, think of it as a big bracket as well as just a big square root symbol. So the first thing I'm going to undo here is the multiply by 5 on the outside. So the first thing I'll do here is divide both sides by 5. Divide by 5. So it's going to be square root of 4 minus ax equals y divided by 5. The next thing I'll do going up is sort out my powers. So I'm going to square both sides to get rid of this square root. So the square and the square root will cancel out. So I'm going to get 4 minus ax equals, and in brackets, y divided by 5 squared. So now that we've got rid of the square root, we've effectively also got rid of the big bracket surrounding the 4 minus ax, and now I can sort out this stuff here. X is in a bit of a negative situation here, so I'll add that term onto the other side, plus ax onto the other side. So it's going to be 4 equals y over 5 squared plus ax. Then I'll subtract this thing here onto the other side, so it'll be 4 minus y divided by 5 squared equals ax. And then I think I'll have to restart at the top of this section here. Then I'll have to get rid of this divide by a here. So it's going to be 4 minus y over 5 squared equals, so divide by a equals x. Now, we can't have this. We can't have this triple tiered fraction, so this needs sorting out. So instead, what I'm going to do, before I've got to this stage here, is I'm going to write this in a bit of a different way. I'm going to write it as 4 minus y squared over 25 equals ax. Because when you've got a fraction, it's a simple fraction like this thing here, you can actually just square the top and square the bottom, and the two things are equivalent. Now when I divide by a, it's going to be 4 divided by a, and the a is also going to appear on the bottom of this fraction here, y squared over 25a equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question here. So it's a bit of a difficult one here. Never accept a final answer where you've got a triple tiered fraction. What you need to do is expand the brackets of your squared component, and then when you divide by a, the a will appear on the bottom of the fraction on the other side. Okay, let's give this question a go now. Make sure you've paused the video and given it a go. The first thing I'm going to do here is add the thing that's got x in it onto the other side. So I'm going to now add the whole expression of x squared plus 9 onto the other side, on both sides here. So I'm going to get y add the square root of x squared plus 9 equals a. Then I'm going to get rid of the y onto the other side, so I'll take it away, so minus y on both sides. So that's going to give me the square root of x squared plus 9 equals a minus y. Then I'm going to get rid of this square root symbol by squaring both sides. So I'm going to get x squared plus 9 equals, and in brackets, a minus y squared. Let's just move up here now. The next thing I'm going to do is subtract 9 from both sides. So it's going to be x squared equals a minus y squared, take away 9. And I'm going to get rid of this squared symbol by square rooting both sides. And it's just going to be a whopping great big square root around a minus y squared minus 9. And then the plus or minus symbol at the front of it as well. So there we are, that's the answer in this question. Let's now move on to the next question. Make sure you've paused the video and given this question a good go. So the first thing I'll do is I'll add a onto the other side. Sort out what's surrounding the big square root here. Then I'll need to sort out the square root by squaring both sides. So it'd be y plus a squared equals x squared z plus b. Now what you can't do when you square both sides, I've kind of done it without talking about it here, is you got to put brackets around the whole of that other side and then square it. If it's just the letter y, then just write y squared. But if it's something that's being added or subtracted together, you got to put brackets around it and then square it, or then square root it. The next thing I'll do is I'll subtract b, then you have to leave this stuff inside the brackets. Subtract b. Then you need to divide by z because you're following the reverse order of BODMAS. This is a multiply onto the x. This is a power of x. So it's going to be y plus a squared minus b divided by z equals x squared. And the final thing you'll have to do is get rid of the square by square rooting. So it's going to be plus or minus a whopping big great square root y plus a squared minus b divided by z equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. So we're slowly building up the skills here. Hopefully you're finding these still challenging but easier as we go along and you're building up your skills. In this question we're going to get rid of the square root symbol by squaring both sides. So it's going to be y squared equals w minus ax squared. X is in a bit of a negative situation here, so we'll move it onto the other side by adding ax squared onto both sides. So it's going to be y squared add ax squared equals y. Then I'll get rid of this add y squared, so it's a minus y squared now on the other side. And then we're going to divide by a. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll get rid of this squared symbol by square rooting. So it's going to be x equals plus or minus the square root of w minus y squared over a. And there we are. That's the answer in this question. Okay, we're going to move on to some fractions questions now. So pause the video and give this one a go. Okay, so we're now going to move on to some questions with fractions in. We're still going to follow the reverse operations of BODMAS, and let's see how we're going to do that in this question. Now what we have in this question here is an invisible set of brackets. We have an invisible set of brackets around this x minus 3. It means this formula means x minus 3 and then divide it by 4. The fraction line here means divide. So let's see what we've got here. We've got we've got subtraction, but that's inside the brackets. We don't count that yet. We've first got division. So how do we undo division? We multiply. The opposite of dividing by 4 is timesing by 4. So we'll times by 4 on both sides and we'll get x minus 3 equals 4y. Now, when you've got a pair of brackets around something and there's nothing outside the pair of brackets, those brackets are effectively now useless. There's no need for them, so we'll just delete them. Now we'll go down to the subtraction, now that the brackets have been deleted, and add 3 to both sides. So it's going to be x equals 4y plus 3. And there we are, that's the answer in this question. So when you see a fraction, you've got more than one thing on the top, just imagine that there's an invisible set of brackets around that thing on the top or on the bottom. If you've got two things added together on the bottom, those things are in brackets. Let's move on to this question. So the first thing we'll have a look at is the reverse operation of BODMAS. And the first thing we have to remember is that there's an invisible set of brackets around the numerator. So the first thing we get to is this division by 6. So we're going to now do the opposite of that, which is to multiply by 6. So that's the first thing we need to do. 6y equals 9 plus 2x. That would be in a set of brackets, but because there's nothing surrounding the brackets, I've just not written them in. Now we'll go back down to the bottom and we see we've got now addition. So I'll have to undo that addition by subtraction. Subtract by 9 on both sides, 6y minus 9 equals 2x. And then carrying up, I've got multiply, so I'll then divide by 2, divide by 2. 6y minus 9 divided by 2 equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to that question. Let's move on to the next one. So I can see here I've got some brackets appearing around the b minus cx here. So I'm going to need to times both sides by d to move it onto the left hand side. So times both sides by d, times both sides by d. Now I'm going to multiply everything here by d. So it's going to look like AD plus d times d, which is d squared, equals b minus cx. Now x is in a negative position here. Also, before I can move on to that, what I quite like to do when I'm rearranging formulas is move everything onto one horizontal line, so there's no fractions involved at all. Now that I'm in this position here, I find rearranging formulae a lot easier. So that must be one of your first objectives when you've got a fraction in your rearranging formula, to make it into a horizontal line by multiplying up on your denominator. So x is in a negative position here, so I'll add cx onto both sides. So it's going to be AD plus d squared plus cx equals b. Then I'll take away this thing and this thing onto the other side. So in one manoeuvre, I'm going to take away AD and I'm going to take away d squared. So I'll have cx equals b minus AD minus d squared, and then divide by this c here. It's the only thing I've got left to do. And yes, I don't really like to have fractions, but it's necessary here. So there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. So x is now on the bottom. That doesn't really change anything. We're still going to be timesing by x onto the left hand side, so that I can make sure my formula, so I can make my formula into just one horizontal line. So it's going to be xy equals a plus b. Then I need to get rid of this multiply by y, so I'll divide by y. So it's going to be x equals a plus b divided by y. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. So in the next one I have this more complicated thing here. Pause the video and give this one a go. Otherwise I'm going to pretend that the top are in brackets and the bottom are in brackets here. If you've got more than one thing added or subtracted on the top or the bottom, you've got to pretend like they're in brackets. Mathematicians are a bit lazy and we won't write those brackets, but you've got to visualize those brackets there. And the first thing I'm going to do is multiply both sides by the bottom thing, x squared plus 2. And that will make sure that will turn this formula into a different formula that will have everything on the same line. So it's going to be y times by x squared plus 2 equals a minus n. And you can see what needs to be done on the left hand side here. We need to now expand the brackets. So x squared y plus 2y equals a minus n. We're making x the subject here, so we'll take away this 2y. A minus n minus 2y. Then we'll divide by the y. Divide by y, and then the final thing to do, let's move up to this position here. I need to get rid of the squared, so I'm going to square root both sides. So it's going to be x equals plus or minus the square root of a minus n minus 2y over y. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Pretty difficult one, that one. Hopefully we're building up the skills as we're going along. Let's move on to the next one. So I'm going to imagine the denominator here in a pair of brackets, and I'm going to multiply that brackets onto the other side. So from this line to this line, times by 5 minus x. So it's going to be y bracket 5 minus x equals t. The next thing will be obvious, it will just be expand the brackets. 5y minus xy equals t. X is in a bit of a negative situation here, so I'll add it onto the other side. T plus xy. Then I'll take away the t, and I'll divide by the y, and I'll move up to the next line for that. Divide by y, 5y minus t over y equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to that question. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so in this question here, we need to sort out the thing on the side of the fraction first. So the first thing I'll do here is add a. So I'm going to get t plus a equals c over d plus 3x. The next thing I'll do is I'll treat this thing on the denominator here as if it's in brackets and multiply it onto the other side. So multiplied by d plus 3x. So I'm going to get now, and this thing needs to be in brackets as well if I'm multiplying all of this, t plus a times d plus 3x equals c. Great, everything's on one line, but I'm now going to ruin that by dividing by this first bracket. I wouldn't be surprised if you tried to expand the brackets here, but you may have got stuck at some point. I'm going to divide by this thing here. Reason being is that when you've got two brackets just next to each other, they're effectively invisibly timesing by each other. So to get rid of this one, I'll divide by it. So d plus 3x equals c over t plus 3a. Sorry, t plus a. Move up to this line now. The next thing I'll do is I'll subtract the d onto the other side, so it's going to be 3x equals c over t plus a minus d. And now I'm going to divide by 3, and when I divide by 3, watch what happens. It's going to be c over 3t plus a, and then minus d over 3. So both the components were divided by 3 here, and on the left-hand one, the 3 appeared on the denominator of the fraction. And that's how you can divide by 3 when you've already got a fraction. You just put it on the denominator. So there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's now move on to the next one. So the first thing I think I'll do is I'll subtract the a onto the other side, and it's going to be t minus a equals minus b over c minus x. The next thing I'll do is I'll times by this expression here on the denominator. So it's going to be t minus a multiplied by c minus x equals minus b. That negative symbol there still needs to be attached to the b. The next thing I think I'll do is I'll divide by this bracket at the start. So it's going to be c minus x equals minus b over t minus a. X is in a bit of a negative situation here, so I'll add it onto the other side. So c equals minus b over t minus a plus x. And then I'll have to get rid of this thing from the right-hand side onto the left-hand side. So I'll add b over t minus a. So that's going to give us c plus b over t minus a equals x. Good. So this term here is a negative expression at the moment, so I'll have to add it onto the other side. And there we are, that's the answer to that question. Let's move on to the next one. Pause the video and give this one a go. First of all, I think what I'll do is I'll subtract the t onto the other side, and then it's going to be minus c plus d over 3 minus x. Then I'll multiply by this bracket onto the other side, so it's going to be y minus t 3 minus x equals minus bracket c plus d. Then I'll divide by this bracket at the start. 3 minus x equals minus c plus d over y minus t. Then I think I'll add the x onto the other side. It's in a bit of a negative situation at the moment. So 3 equals minus c plus d over y minus t plus x. Then I'll add this expression onto the other side because it's a negative at the moment. So it's going to be 3 add c plus d over y minus t equals x. And there we are. Those last three have been pretty difficult there. So well done if you've got any of those three right. Wowzers, this one here is looking difficult. So the first thing I think I'll do is I'll subtract the w onto the other side. So it's going to be minus a plus b over e minus 2x equals e plus f minus w. So from this line to this line I've taken away w. Now I can times by this e minus 2x, so it's going to be minus a plus b equals, in brackets, e plus f minus w, and then in brackets e minus 2x. Then I'll divide by this bracket here. So I'm going to get minus a plus b over e plus f minus w equals e minus 2x. X is in a bit of a negative situation here, so I'll add it to the other side. So it's going to be minus a plus b over e plus f minus w equals, so then I need to add 2x on the left equals e. Then I'll add this expression here onto the other side because it's a negative at the moment. So it's e plus a plus b over e plus f plus, so e minus w. Then I'll have to divide by 2, so be very careful how you do this. It's going to be e divided by 2, and then plus a plus b, and then on the bottom of this fraction here, it's going to be 2e plus f minus w. And there we are, that's the answer to that question there. Very difficult one, that one. Don't be surprised if you got that one wrong. Learn how we do it now, and maybe come back to it another day. Alright then, we're going to move on to some more trickier formulas here. Let me just show you something that's wrong first of all. If I was to take this formula and just divide by c, there we are, that supposedly is a correct answer because I've got x on one side, some letters on another side, and I've made x the subject. Voila, that should be correct. But no, this is incorrect because x is still a letter on the other side. There should be no x's on the other side of the formula if you've made x the subject and it's on the other side of the formula. So x can't appear on both sides, x must only appear at the front or at the right at the back of the formula that you've rearranged. So let's have another go at this one. So what we need to do instead is we need to group all the x's on the same side. So the first thing I'm going to do here is take away bx. So I'm going to get a equals cx minus bx. Now, how am I going to convert two x's here into a single x? Well, this is where it gets a bit tricky, and we need to now factorize. So we're going to turn two x's into a single x using some brackets. So it's going to be x brackets, because x is a common factor between these two expressions here. In the first case it's going to be c, because when I expand the brackets I'll get x times c, which is cx, and then the second term will be x times something gives me minus bx, and that'll be minus b. And you can see here from line 2 to line 3 I've turned what two x's, or a term where x appears twice, into a term where x appears just once. Now what I'm going to do is I'm now going to divide by this bracket, divide by c minus b, and I'm going to get a divided by c minus b equals x. And that's the answer to this question. X appears on the right hand side, doesn't appear on the left hand side at all. So what have we done here? In this step to this step, we've grouped the x's on the same side. Group x's on the same side. The next thing we've done is then factorize out the x's. If there was anything else that was getting in the way on the right hand side, I'd move it to the other side. In this case there aren't. So I've factorized by using some brackets. And then the last thing I've done is I've divided by the bracket so that x is just left on its own. Divide by bracket. So these are the basic 3 steps. Sometimes we need 4 steps, such as in this question here. We need 4 steps in this question here, but give it a go anyway before I have a go in the question. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move x's on the same side. I'm going to move them on the left hand side this time. So I'm going to take away cx from both sides. Okay, so on the left hand side, this b term here doesn't have any x's in it. So I'm going to move that to the right hand side now by taking away b. So I'm going to have ax minus cx equals d minus b. And lovely, x's are all on one side. Anything else that doesn't have an x in it is on the other side. Now I'm going to factorize by using some brackets. So it's going to be x, because x is the common factor between the two expressions here. Then it's going to be a minus c equals d minus b. Then we divide by the bracket. So I'm going to divide by a minus c. So it's going to be d minus b divided by a minus c. And remember, when you write fractions, you can effectively ignore the brackets around your a minus c here because it's implied. So there we are, that's the answer to this question. So move your x's on one side, whichever side you choose. Then it's going to be move anything else that doesn't have an x in it on the other side. Then factorize, then divide by the bracket. Let's move on to the next one. So in this case I get to choose which side I put my x's on. And I'd like things to be as positive as possible. I've got dx on this side, positive dx, and I've got negative bx on this side. I think it would be nicer if I move this minus bx and make it positive on the right hand side. So in this question I'm going to add bx to both sides. So that's going to give me a equals c plus dx plus bx. Now this c here doesn't have an x in it, so I'm going to now take away c from both sides. A minus c equals dx plus bx. The next thing I'm now going to do is factorise, because x's are all on one side and there's everything else on the other. So it's going to be a minus c equals x, and then in brackets d plus b. The final thing I need to do is now divide by the brackets, so it's a minus c over d plus b equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. So group your x's on one side, trying to make things as positive as possible, put anything else on the other side, and then divide by the bracket that you've created in step 3. Let's move on to the next one. I'll analyse the x's here. I've got positive on this side, negative on this side, so I think I'll add cx to both sides. It just makes things as positive as possible. So a plus bx plus cx equals d. Now I'll take away a from both sides, so that anything that doesn't have an x in it is out the way. Then I can factorise b plus c equals d minus a. Then I'll divide by what's in the bracket, so it's going to be d minus a divided by b plus c. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. So I'm looking at my x's here, analysing where they're positive and negative. It's negative on this side, so I think what I'll do is I'll move my x's onto the right hand side. So I'll make it add xy to both sides. On the left hand side I'm going to be left with w, and on the right hand side I'm going to have wx plus y plus xy. I need to get rid of this y now, that doesn't have x in it, so I'm going to subtract y from both sides. So w minus y equals wx plus xy. Then I'm going to bring in some brackets for the right hand side, so I can turn two x's into a single x. So I'm going to have w minus y equals x, and then in brackets it's going to be w, and on the second bit it's going to be y. Then I'm going to divide by what's in the bracket, so I'm going to have w minus y over w plus y equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the first thing I think I'll do here is I'll expand the bracket. So it's going to be a minus bx, and then it's minus b times c, so that'd be minus bc equals ex plus f. Now I need to group all my x's on one side. Let's look at what has an x in. I've got minus bx here, and I've got ex here, so I think I'll move the minus bx onto the other side to make things as positive as possible. So add bx onto the other side. A minus bc equals ex plus f plus bx. Then I'll get rid of the f that's in the middle there, so take away f from both sides. So it's going to be a minus bc minus f equals ex plus bx. Then I'll factorise the x from the right hand side, e plus b, and that's equal to a minus bc minus f, and then I'll divide by what's in the bracket, so I'll move up here for that. A minus bc minus f divided by e plus b equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. So again, first thing I'll do is I'll expand the brackets. xy plus xz equals ax plus b. Now the next thing I'll need to do is group all the x's on the same side. I've got 1, 2, 3 things with x's in here, so it'll probably be easier if I move the ax onto the left hand side. So take away ax from both sides, so it's xy plus xz plus, minus ax equals b. The next thing I'll do is I'll need to factorise, so I'll have x times something equals xy, so that's y. X times something equals xz, that'd be plus z, and x times something gives me minus ax, that'd be minus a. So 3 things needed to go in the bracket there. Now we'll divide by the bracket. X equals b over y plus z minus a. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. So I've got x squared here, but that will not be too bad. I just need to get all my x's on the same side first again. So I'll add dx squared onto the left-hand side. So it's going to be ax squared, add b, add dx squared equals c. I'll get the b out the way now, so take away b from both sides. C minus b. Now it's only the x that's being squared here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to factorise out x squared from both the terms here. And what have I got left in the bracket? It would just be a plus d. Then divide by the bracket. So I'll have x squared equals c minus b divided by a plus d. And the final thing I'll need to do now is get rid of this squared by square rooting. So it's going to be x equals plus or minus the square root of c minus b over a plus d. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. So first of all, I'll expand the brackets. ab minus ax squared equals x squared y. So let's move the x squared onto the other side. So it'll be ab equals x squared y plus ax squared. Let's now factorise the x squared bracket y plus a. Divide by the y plus a, so it'll be ab over a plus y. Doesn't matter what order you add things together in, preferring it to be in alphabetical order. Now let's square root both sides, so x equals plus or minus the square root of ab over a plus y. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one, very similar but with square rooting here. First thing I'll do is I'll add the square root of x onto the other side, so it's going to be a root x plus f plus the square root of x equals g. Let's take away the f onto the other side. That'll be g minus f. Now let's factorise out the square root of x. So it's going to be square root of x, a in the first bracket, and then just 1 in the second part, because I need square root of x times by 1 to give me this 1 square root of x. And equals g minus f. Next thing I need to do is divide by what's in the bracket, so it'd be g minus f over a plus 1. And the final thing I need to do is get rid of this square root, so I will now square both sides, and that's just be putting a big bracket around it and then squaring the fraction like that. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. So what I'm going to need to do first here is to make it all on one horizontal line. That'll be nice and much better than it is at the moment. So I'm going to put in brackets the denominator and multiply it to the other side. Multiply by x plus b. So I'm going to get x plus a equals c times in brackets x plus b. Next thing I'll do is I'll expand the bracket, so it's x plus a equals cx plus bc. I've preferred to write those two multiplying together there in alphabetical order. Now I need to group my x's on the same side. I think I'll move the x on the left hand side to the right. Then I'll take away bc. And then I'll factorise, so it would be a minus bc equals x, and then in brackets it will be c for the first term, that will be minus 1 for the second term. And the final thing to do will be divide by the bracket, so it will be a minus bc divided by c minus 1 equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Moving on to the next part, very similar to the one before, put the denominator in brackets and multiply it onto the other side. So first thing is to times by b plus x in a pair of brackets. So my answer is going to be a minus x equals d brackets b plus x. Then I think I'll expand the brackets, a minus x equals bd plus dx. X is on the same side, it will be easier to move this negative x onto the onto the right hand side. So db, or bd rather, add dx, add another x, take away the bd onto the other side. Factorize out the x on the right hand side. In the first term it's going to be d, and the second term it's just going to be plus 1 because the x needs to multiply by something to make an x. In this case it's 1. Then we'll divide by what's inside the bracket, so it's a minus bd over d plus 1 equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. Now what we need to do here, I'm going to teach you the little trick for this one, is do a bit of cross multiplying. Now what I mean by that is when you've got two fractions on the same side and they're equal to each other, you can do something called cross multiplying. You can multiply a onto the other side and the d onto the other side. So what I'm effectively doing here, the mathematical operation is multiplied by AD on both sides. That's going to give me dx, so I've multiplied diagonally from bottom right up to the top left, and then I'm going to multiply from the bottom left onto the top right here. Now I'll briefly explain why that works. If I'm multiplying the left hand side by AD, then D appears, but A doesn't because the left hand side is being divided by A, so the two multiply by A and divide by A will cancel out. Same thing will happen on the right. If I multiply by AD, the A will appear, but the D won't appear. It will have just cancelled out the fraction on the bottom. The next thing I'll do is I will now expand the brackets, AX plus AC. Group your x's on one side, it'd be easier to move the ax onto the other side, so dx minus ax equals ac, and then I'll factorize out the x, and then I'll divide by what's inside the brackets, so it'd be ac over d minus a. Let's move on to the next one. So again, do some cross multiplying here. So it's going to be ax on the left hand side, and then it's going to be b plus c times x plus b on the right hand side. Now I'll have to expand the double brackets here. So it's ax equals bx plus b squared plus cx plus bc. Now all the x's have to move onto the same side here, so I think I'll subtract the two things with x's in onto the left hand side, leaving these terms positive. Then I'll do some factorizing. Three things I've got to factorize here, a minus b, and a minus c. And then I'll divide by what's inside the bracket, so it's x equals b squared plus bc over a minus b minus c. And there we are, that's the answer to that question. So it's a cheeky bit of what we call cross multiplying. Moving on to the next part, pause the video and give this one a go. We need to get rid of the square root, so let's square both sides first. We can't get into doing anything inside this square root before we have square rooted. So it's going to be ax over b plus x equals c squared. So square both sides there. Now we'll multiply this term here onto the other side. So we'll now multiply by b plus x. And that's going to give us ax equals c squared b plus x. Then we'll expand the brackets. Ax equals bc squared plus c squared x, just preferring to write things in alphabetical order. It's only the c thing that's being squared. B is not going to be squared and x is not going to be squared. It's just c that's going to be squared here. We now need to move all of the x terms onto the same side, so I think the easiest thing to do there will be to subtract c squared x. So that's going to give us ax minus c squared x equals bc squared. The next thing to do will be to factorize the x out. So on the left hand side it's going to be a minus c squared equals bc squared. And then divide by what's inside the brackets. X equals bc squared divided by a minus c squared. And there we are, that's the answer to that question. Let's now move on to the next one. So in this term here, we're going to, first thing to do would be to move it into one horizontal line. So it's going to be a plus b brackets d minus x equals cx. Let's expand the brackets now. So it's going to be ad plus bd minus ax minus bx equals cx. The next thing to do would be to move the x's onto the same side, so we'll add ax and bx onto the same side, so ad plus bd equals cx plus ax plus bx. The next thing we'll do is we'll now put some brackets around the right hand side, so x brackets c plus a plus b. And then the final thing to do will be to divide by what's inside the bracket here. So x equals ad plus bd equals, divide by, and it doesn't matter what order we add these three things in. So I'm just going to add them in alphabetical order, a plus b plus c. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so in this question, the way I'm going to solve this is by multiplying everything by b, because I've got b in the components down the bottom here. Now, what I'm going to do here is multiply y by b, so that'll make it by. X also needs to multiply by b, so that's going to be bx. And then this term here has to also multiply by b, but it has a divide by b in it, so that's going to just get rid of the divide by b here. So this is what's happened here. The y needs to multiply by b, the x needs to multiply by b, this thing here needs to multiply by b, but in multiplying this thing by b, it's just cancelled out the divide by b. So this is the answer. Well, we've still got to rearrange it. The next thing we'll need to do is factorize out the x on the right hand side. Luckily all the x's are on one side, and then divide by the brackets by over b plus a, or a plus b, depending what order you want to write them in, is the final answer there. So in this technique, we just decided to multiply each component by b. Where they're separated by an addition, you then decide to add times by a b. If they're multiplying together, then you just multiply the whole thing by b. In this term here, it's roughly the same thing. We're going to multiply everything by a. So in the first expression, when I multiply by a, that would just cancel out the divide by a. So I'm left with just x here. In the second term, I need to multiply by a, so that's going to be abx. And in the third term here on the other side, I'm going to have to multiply by a to make it ac. Then I'm going to factorize out the x on the left-hand side, so it's going to be 1 for this 1x here, and then it's going to be plus ab here equals AC, then divide by what's in the brackets, so it's going to be AC divided by 1 plus AB. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Moving on to the next one, well, let's make it into one horizontal line first. So the first thing I'll do is I will times the x onto the other side. So multiply by x here, so it's going to be xy equals the square root of x squared plus a. Now I need to get rid of this square root symbol, so I'll square both sides here. So square this side and square this side. Now in this left hand side it's going to be xy squared equals x squared plus a, but we can actually expand the brackets of this. If we think about it, xy squared, when you square something you times it by itself, don't you? So it's going to be xy times xy. Now I can rearrange my order of multiplication here. At the moment it's going x times y times x times y. Well, let's say I want to multiply the x's together first. X times x, that's x squared, and y times y, that's y squared. So I can actually expand the bracket, so it's x squared y squared equals x squared plus a. Alright, we're now back on track for rearranging this formula. Let's now group the x squareds on the same side by subtracting x squared onto the left hand side, and then factorize out the x squared. I've got minus 1x squared here, then divide by what's inside the bracket, so x squared equals a over y squared minus 1, and then square root both sides to get rid of the squared symbol, so plus or minus the square root of a over y squared minus 1. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. So very similar here. Let's get rid of the square root first by squaring both sides. That will get rid of the square root around the left hand side, and then we square the right hand side, so it's q squared. Let's now move this into a position where it's all on one horizontal line. So I'll times by wx. So it's going to be px plus 3 equals q squared wx. Let's get all the x's on the same side now, so we'll subtract the px onto the other side, so q squared wx minus px. Now we can factorise out the x on the right hand side, so it's going to be x bracket q squared w minus p, and then divide by the thing inside the bracket, so it's 3 divided by q squared w minus p equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. Right, this is a difficult one here. So, how am I going to tell you how to do this? First of all, I think we'll add these fractions together. Now, the only way you can add fractions together if you've got the same denominator. So on this left-hand fraction, I'm going to put an extra b on the bottom. Now, when I've put an extra b on the bottom, effectively I've multiplied by b on the bottom, so I'll need to multiply by b on the top as well. So that's going to make it bx. And on the second part of the fraction, I'm going to put an extra a on the bottom. Now I've got the same denominators, but I can't just put an a on the bottom of this fraction without putting an a on the top. So I've multiplied the top and bottom of this fraction here by a. Now that I've got the same fractions, I can now add the fractions together. And it's top add top and keep the bottom the same. Now I'm going to times by AB onto the other side, so it's going to be BX add AX equals ABC. Then I'll factorise out the x on the left hand side, so it's B plus A equals ABC. And then the next thing I'm going to do is divide by what's inside the brackets. So it's b plus a, or you can write it in alphabetical order if you're just adding things together, a plus b. And there we are. So it's an adding fractions question as well as a rearranging formula question. Make sure that when you add fractions, you are multiplying top and bottom of the fraction by the same amount, so you get the same thing on the top, same things on the bottom, so that you can then add the two fractions together. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, well in this question, all I need to do is put a 2 on the bottom of the left one and a 2 on the top of the left one as well. So I've times top and bottom by 2. Now the fractions have the same denominators, I can add the numerators. 2a plus b over 2x equals c. Then I'll multiply the 2x onto the other side, so 2a plus b equals 2cx. So the number always multiplies at the front, and is then the rest of the letters are in alphabetical order, so that's why it's gone 2cx. Then I'll divide by 2c to get x on its own, so it'd be 2a plus b divided by 2c equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. So the first thing we'll need to do is add these fractions together on the left hand side here. So I want to make both fractions have xy on the bottom of them. On the left hand one it already has x on the bottom, so I'll need to make sure y is added to the top and the bottom. So it's y on the top. And on the left hand one I need to make sure x is added, or is multiplied onto the bottom, so x will have to multiply onto the top as well. So it's x on the top there, and 1 over z there. Now I can add my fractions together, so it would be x plus y, or y plus x, doesn't matter what order you add things in, over xy equals 1 over z. Then we'll do that cross-multiplying thing. When you've got two fractions on both sides, you can cross-multiply like that. So it's going to be in brackets x plus y multiplied by z equals xy. Let's expand the brackets now. xz plus yz equals xy. Group your x's together, so I'll take away xz onto the other side. xy minus xz. Then I'll factorise yz equals x brackets y minus z, in brackets like that. Then I'll divide by what's inside the brackets, yz divided by y minus z equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. The reason I put a little line through my z's is because it sometimes gets confused between a 2 and a z. When I write a z like this, it sometimes looks like a 2, but when I put a line through it, it definitely looks like a z. So there we are, add the fractions together, make sure your denominator terms have the same on the bottoms so you can then add them together. And it doesn't matter what order you add them in, if it's y and x, I prefer to add it in alphabetical order. Moving on to this question here, let's make sure we can subtract fractions as well. So on the denominators, I want to make sure it's xy on the bottom of both denominators. So that means that there needs to be an extra x on the left-hand one and an extra y on the right-hand one. And I'm subtracting here. Equals 4z, 4 over z. Now let's subtract the top, so it's 2x minus 3y over xy equals 4 over z. Now that we have two fractions here, we can do that whole cross-multiplying malark. So it's going to be z multiplied by 2x minus 3y equals 4xy. The next thing we'll do here is expand the brackets. 2xz minus 3yz equals 4xy. The next thing we'll do is we'll group the x's on the same side. In fact, if I move this on the other side and that on that side, then it will reduce the amount of negatives that we have. 4xy equals 3yz. So this thing got moved onto that side by adding it, and this thing got moved onto this side by subtracting it. Then I'll factorize out the x, so it's going to be 2z minus 4y equals 3yz. Then I'll divide by what's inside the brackets, that's going to be 3yz divided by 2z minus 4y. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so in this question again we are adding fractions together. We've already got x's on the bottom of both of them. So what I want now is for them to have the same denominator. They've already got x's that are the same on the bottom. I want them to have a y on the bottom of both of them, and I want them to have a z on the bottom of the both of them. So let's have a look at this left-hand one. The only thing I haven't got is a z, so it's going to need to multiply by a z on the top, so it's 1z. And the only thing in the right-hand fraction I haven't got is the y, so it's now going to be 2y equals 3. Let's now add the two things together. When you're adding fractions, you add the tops, doesn't matter what order. I'm just going to do them in alphabetical order over the denominator. Then let's create it all into one straight horizontal line. So I'll multiply the denominator onto the right-hand side. So it'd be 3xyz. Then we just need to make x the subject, so I'm going to divide by everything that's surrounding the x, so it's going to be 2y plus z divided by everything that's being multiplied onto x, that's the 3, the y, and the z equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Let's move on to the next one. So I need to subtract these two fractions together here. They need to have a common denominator of y and z. Y and z. On the left hand one we need to put an extra z on it, az, and on the right hand one we need to put an extra y on it, so by equals c over x. Let's now subtract the two fractions from each other. Az minus by over yz equals c over x. The next thing we need to now do is do that cross-multiplying thing. So that multiplies up there, that multiplies up there. So it's going to be x brackets az minus by brackets equals cyz. And usually I'd expand the brackets here, but I don't need to because I need to make x the subject. So I just need to divide by what's inside this bracket here. So it's going to be x equals cyz divided by az minus by. And there we are, that's the answer in this question. Right, let's now move on to these difficult ones here. So different type of question, but let's give it a go. The first thing I think we'll do is we'll divide by the 2 here because we want to get inside this square root. The only way you can get inside the square root is to move everything that's around it first, then square the other side. So I'm now going to square the other side, so it's going to be t over 2 squared equals L over x. Now when you square something like this, if I square t over 2, then that means multiply it by itself. So that's going to be t over 2 times t over 2. And the way you multiply fractions together is top times top, bottom times bottom. So it's going to be t squared over 4. Or a shortcut would be square the top, square the bottom. So that's what I'll do. Expand the brackets, t squared over 4 equals L over x. Now we do the cross multiplying thing when we've got fractions on both sides. So it's going to be t squared x equals 4L. And the final thing to do would be to divide by what's in front of the x. So it's divide by t squared, 4L divided by t squared. And there we are, that's the answer. So the little extra bit of difficulty here was just knowing that you can expand a square when you're squaring a fraction. Okay, let's move on to the next bit. So we need to get into this square root, so we'll get rid of the 3 first, so divide by 3. Then we will undo the square root here by squaring the other side, and we know that we can just square the top and the bottom here. The next thing we'll do is we'll do that cross multiplying thing, so it's going to be bxy squared equals 9a. Then we'll divide by what's multiplying by x. B is being multiplied by x, y squared is being multiplied by x, so I'll divide by those two things. So it's 9a divided by by squared. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Wowzers, let's move on to this one here. So the first thing I think we'll do is we'll divide by the c because we want to get into this square root here. So it's going to be a plus b divided by c equals the square root of 1 over x plus 4. The next thing we'll do is we'll square both sides, so we can square the top, and you have to do this very carefully. You can't just do a squared plus b squared, you have to do a plus b all squared over c squared equals 1 over x plus 4. The next thing we need to do is that cross multiplying thing, so we're going to need to do a plus b squared times x plus 4 equals 1 times c squared, that's just c squared. The next thing we'll do is we'll divide by this thing at the front here, the a plus b squared, so it's just then x plus 4 equals c squared over a plus b all squared. Then we'll just take away the 4, so it's going to be x equals c squared over a plus b all squared minus 4 on the side. And there we are. That was a real difficult one there. Well done if you got that one. Otherwise, hopefully you've learnt how to do it now. Let's move on to the next one. So, first of all, I don't really like the fact that this whole expression here on the right-hand side has a negative symbol in front of it. So I'm going to add this onto the other side. And at the same time, I'm going to move the y onto the right-hand side. So it's going to be 5 brackets a over b plus x equals c minus y. So I've subtracted the y onto the right, and I've added this negative thing onto the left. Now I'll divide by the 5, so I can get inside this square root, c minus y over 5. And the next thing I'll do is I'll square both sides to get rid of the square root. On the top of the right hand side, it's going to be c minus y squared over 25. So I square the top and square the bottom. Next thing I'll do is I'll do that cross multiplying thing. So it's going to be 25a equals, and then in brackets, b plus x times c minus y squared. Then I'll divide by this c minus y squared equals b plus x, and the only thing left to do now is just to take away the x from both sides. 25a over c minus y squared minus b equals x. And there we are, that's the answer to this question. Okay, and that is the final question that we're going to go through from these 60 questions Rearranging Formulae Bootcamp video. Thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you've learned something as we've gone along. If you need to come back and practice at some point, please do. You're always welcome. And yeah, thanks very much for watching.